Today we're going to be doing a topic that I've been waiting a long time to do and have done a lot of research to do. Today we're going to be talking about whether or not the NCAA should pay its athletes. Now this is a very nuanced conversation and I'm going to try to hit this from every which way possible. So this is going to be an 8-part series, so if you want to join in the conversation, please feel free to like the video and subscribe down below and leave a comment and let me know what you think. But let's get started today with looking at a brief history of the NCAA. We can thank the first ever intercollegiate athletic competition to those brainiacs over there at Harvard and Yale. On August 3rd, 1852, the two schools got together for a good old-fashioned rowing competition. On that day, Harvard would beat Yale in the 2-mile race, a trend that they would continue in the country's oldest rivalry. The first place prize was a pair of black walnut silver-inscribed trophy oars. The trophy oars were awarded to Harvard by General Ford Franklin Pierce, who in 1853 became the 14th president of the United States. Today, the 1852 trophy oars are the oldest intercollegiate athletic prize in North America. Because there wasn't an overseeing governing body to determine the rules, in 1870 the Rowing Association of American Colleges was formed by the captains of the leading crews of the day. They will come up with the primary rule of eligibility, that only undergraduate students should be able to represent their college in the regatta. To this day, this is the foundational rule of the NCAA's rules of eligibility. Harvard and Yale, like many other things in America, are pioneers when it comes to intercollegiate sports. The two schools would also compete in the first intercollegiate contest in ice hockey, soccer, and 5-on-5 basketball. On November 6, 1869, neighboring schools Rutgers and Princeton would compete in the first intercollegiate football game. Over 100 spectators showed up for the 25-on-25 game. Rutgers would win the game 6-4. These early contests gives us our first real glimpse at what intercollegiate sports is all about. To prove my school is better than your school. In the beginning, only two things mattered. Number one, I went to one school, you went to another school. And number two, my school is better than your school. It really is. At the turn of the century, intercollegiate sports were facing a big problem, mainly death. That's right, people were consistently dying while engaged in competition, particularly in football because there weren't any set rules, as you can see from the 25-on-25 rugby style of play. There was a huge problem with injury and people dying during football matches. Enter the President of the United States. On October 9, 1905, Theodore Roosevelt, being a Harvard man and a big football fan, called representatives from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton and summoned them to the White House to discuss reforms to mitigate unnecessary violence, unsportsmanlike play, and to minimize resultant fatalities and injuries in football. By that time, some were calling for the abolishment of football altogether because already 18 students had died while playing the sport. But President Roosevelt was not having it. On December 28, 1905, a meeting with 62 schools represented to appoint a rules committee. On January 12, 1906, the American Football Rules Committee met. March 31st of that year, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was established. This organization would eventually change its name to the National Collegiate Athletic Association in 1910, or as we know it, the NCAA. For the first few years, the NCAA was a discussion group and rules-making body. But in 1921, the first NCAA National Championship was conducted, the National Collegiate Track and Field Competition. And in 1939, the NCAA Basketball Championship was also established, which, by the way, was won by the University of Oregon. After World War I, the NCAA faced some real hard challenges. Now that people weren't dying playing football, they began cheating. The biggest moral issue was paying players to compete. The question was, were some teams paying students to play or recruiting players to attend schools to play a particular sport? Up until that point, you weren't technically supposed to be recruiting players for the sole purpose of participating in a sport. You were supposed to just be finding students who went to the school and happened to want to play the sport. Take for instance Yale. Yale's football captain was James Hogan. The 27-year-old Hogan enjoyed free tuition, a nice new suit, a handsome stipend, a 10-day paid vacation in Cuba, and best of all, a monopoly on all the sale of American Tobacco Company products on campus. There was another anonymous halfback that was paid $10,000 to go to a certain school. Basically, in these unregulated days, it was anything goes. At that time, while there was no full-time paid staff with the NCAA, they unanimously passed the Sanity Code, which was set to be a dramatic limitation on the benefits that athletes could receive. Under the Sanity Code, athletes could only be provided with free tuition and one free training table meal per day while they were in season. In 1950, a survey went out from the NCAA to see how the Sanity Code was being enforced amongst the colleges. It was the worst kept secret, much like today, that almost every major school was bribing or providing extra incentives for athletes to attend their schools to compete. So when the Sanity Code survey went out, what do you think happened? The exact same thing that happens today. Basically, every school lied and said that they were following the Sanity Code. That was, except for what the media called the Sinful Seven. Villanova, Maryland, Boston College, Virginia, Virginia Tech, the Citadel, and VMI outright responded to the survey that they weren't following the code and that they refused to follow the code, essentially giving the NCAA a giant middle finger. This is very important. This event helps us understand a fundamental issue in college athletics that have been there since the beginning of time and that is still there today and that no one seems to have an answer for. Number one, that before TV money, before the BCS and March Madness, before agents and shoe companies, before all the big money came in, universities were using financial compensation to persuade players to come attend their universities. And that with or without the NCAA, schools will always find a way to persuade the best athletes to attend their school. And number two, there has always been a power struggle between the NCAA and the universities and the colleges. On the one hand, the colleges needs the NCAA because without the NCAA, it becomes a lawless arms race to see who can get the best prospects by any means necessary. But on the other hand, colleges and universities hate the power that the NCAA has. The punishment for not following the Sanity Code was supposed to be expulsion from the NCAA. However, 2/3 committee vote was needed for the teams to get expelled. On January 3rd, 1950, the committee fell 25 votes short of expulsion. This led to the rescinding of the Sanity Code. It was clear that the NCAA needed someone to head it up full-time to legitimize it as an authoritative governing body, to clean up the colleges, and to preserve amateurism. Enter Walter Byers. At 29 years old, Walter Byers became the first executive director of the NCAA. Byers was a very strict man. How strict was he? At the NCAA office in Kansas City, he had employees who sat by the window report to him who showed up late. Byers made it his life ambition to go after the schools who refused to comply with the NCAA regulations. Byers had an objective to take on the big schools that he felt was destroying the spirit of collegiate athletics. It was Byers who came up with the term student athlete. It was he who said that amateurism was foundational to the intercollegiate sports, the model that is still said today of the NCAA. He purposely wanted to put an emphasis on the word student because he wanted to send a message to big schools that academics took preeminence over athletic competition. He believed the primary reasons for intercollegiate athletics was to educate its participants, that by participating in sports in college, students were taught the ethics of being a good citizen, such as teamwork, discipline, and sacrifice, amongst other qualities. Everyone who knew Byers saw him as an admirable, hardworking man who truly loved the spirit of competition. His intentions were to purify collegiate sports and to protect the players from coaches that sought out to exploit them. This is very important to note. Byers originally wanted to prevent the exploitation of student athletes, but even he admitted in his memoirs, Unsportsmanlike Conduct, that it would eventually be the NCAA that would be responsible for the mass exploitation of college athletes. His intentions were pure, but his execution was anything but tactful. It should also be noted that while Byers is the man who helped turn the NCAA to what it is today, Byers also became the man who tried to take it down. By the end of his time as the executive director of the NCAA, he believed that the NCAA had become nothing more than a cartel that was suppressing the wages of the athlete. And he will write about this again in his memoirs, Unsportsmanlike Conduct. But back to the story. In fact, he was incredibly harsh when it came to dealing with coaches and universities whom he felt was violating the spirit of amateurism. He would continue to make rule upon rule and was single-minded when it came to enforcing his policies. Oftentimes under the Byers administration, if the NCAA thought you were guilty, it was just as bad as being guilty. His investigation committee would often use harsh and intimidating methods to prove rules violations. The Byers administration investigations were essentially witch hunts, looking for and sometimes making up rule infractions to punish the big schools, whom Byers thought were tearing college athletics apart. Needless to say, this did not go over well with coaches in university, as the NCAA under Byers quickly went from a small little rules committee to a dominant, powerful machine. Another big thing that happened under Byers were TV contracts. In the beginning of the 1950s, many schools were leery about broadcasting their games on television. The only school that was consistently broadcasting their home games on TV was the University of Pennsylvania. Early on, it was believed that television games would hurt the revenue generated from ticket sales. So initially, the NCAA decided that there would only be one televised game in the nation, and no team was allowed to appear on TV more than once per season. When Pennsylvania decided that it wouldn't abide by the NCAA rules, they were put in bad standing with the NCAA. And the next season, 4 teams chose not to show up to their games against Penn. And Penn quickly caved in to the NCAA's command. From 1952 to 1977, the NCAA owned all the television contract rights of college football. But in 1979, being fed up with the NCAA's monopoly on TV money, schools from the ACC, the Big East, the SEC, the Southwest Conference, and the West Athletic Conference, plus independents Notre Dame, Penn State, Pittsburgh, West Virginia, and the service academies formed the College Football Association. Only schools from the Big Ten and Pac-8 remained with the NCAA and did not join the CFA. On August 8, 1981, the CFA finalized a TV deal with NBC despite the NCAA's ongoing negotiations with ABC and CBS. The NCAA swiftly stated that universities that participated in the CFA contract would face NCAA sanctions not just in football, but in all other sports as well. In response, the University of Georgia and the University of Oklahoma filed suit against the NCAA, seeking an injunction to prevent the NCAA from taking actions against the CFA members. After nearly 3 years of fighting in court, it was finally settled in the Supreme Court that the NCAA's television plan violated antitrust laws that were designed to prohibit group actions that restrained open competition and trade. This meant that now the conferences and the universities were in sole control over their television broadcasting rights. Well, what did this mean for college football? Well, on the surface, it seemed that the universities were able to overcome the tyranny of the NCAA once and for all. The CFA presented their case as if that the NCAA was a greedy institution that sought to oppress the CFA member schools. In the Regents' case, the lawyers won the case by making it about justice. It was wrong for the NCAA to say that schools could not broadcast their games. But in reality, this was all about money. With the Supreme Court deciding in favor of the Board of Regents, every school was free to negotiate their own television contracts. And by 1977, The CFA was no more, and all schools rejoined the NCAA after they negotiated their own TV rights, usually as a conference. Fast forward to today, and what are the results? ESPN has a 12-year deal with the NCAA to host the college football playoffs for $5.6 billion. The Big Ten has a contract with Fox, ESPN, and CBS worth $2.6 billion over 6 years. The ACC has a 20-year deal with ESPN worth $3.6 billion. The SEC gets $55 million per year from CBS through 2023. And the Pac-12 has a 12-year, $3 billion deal with ESPN from Fox. Just in the 5 deals I named, and trust me, there are many more, that is a whopping $1.3 billion generated in TV revenue. Just between college football and men's basketball, that the NCAA generates over $2.4 billion per year with a 60% profit margin. And how much of that money goes to the players? 0. Well, not exactly. Just earlier today, the infamous lawyer Michael Avenatti reported that the Phoenix Suns star center DeAndre Ayton's mother received $100,000 for DeAndre Ayton to attend the University of Arizona. But did she get that money from the NCAA? Not quite. She got it from what I like to call the NCAA's black market, which we're going to talk about in part 2. Peace.